Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Reimagining Cyber. Rob here. And we thought that for this episode, we would actually reflect back on an episode from back at the end of November of last year with Roland Cloutier, the former CSO of TikTok. And he was sharing his thoughts on different areas to focus spending around cyber-specific initiatives for the year 2024. Specifically, we covered different areas around AI and cybersecurity, of course. Also, some of the ramifications that tied into the executive order at that point in time. And then we covered themes around cloud security, identity management. Have a listen, and here's Roland.
From a planning perspective, the use of AI, or even the understanding of it within your environment, is super important. Now, like a lot of the bigger organizations, they've been doing ML, AI, and until the ChatGPT, big LLM, integrated with your own data asset capability came along over the last, year or so. A lot of that kind of ran in the R&D space in the CTO's organization, and CISOs didn't have direct management or control authority over it in any realistic way. And now, of course, everyone's looking at them. And I think it's good for CISOs to look at it in two ways. The first is, if my business is going to compete and succeed in the industry we're in today, and everyone else is using AI to reduce their OpEx and adjust their margins and drive new technology to make us better than the next guy, well, I better be doing it too, and I better enable my organization to be able to do that. So I should have a focused capability on helping them accomplish that. The second is, my job is to defend a business and ensure the sustainability of the operations, the resiliency of the company itself, and the security of all the things that I'm supposed to be securing. So I've got to do those things. And I don't think they're diametrically opposed. I think in our jobs, that's the problem with our job every day, right? I want to run to cloud. I want to use third, fourth, and fifth party ecosystem in order to reduce my cost on processing. We have to deal with these things every day. And AI is just a faster way of doing that. And I think there are key components we need to look at. So first of all, on the how do I help my organization figure this out? Because a lot of them are turning to us and say, make us safe and let us use AI, right? Like it's not necessarily our jobs. There's a CPO, there's a CRO, there's an EIO involved across the entirety of the board. But helping focus up, and I think the team like over at General Mills did a great job, right? Like they sat down, they created an oversight organization, had the right people in it, and then they created clear guidelines. Like, thou may not do this. Thou can do that if you think it's cool, and it fits into this category. Thou may do this if you go through a process, with this type of information. So they established clear guidelines, not a hard and fast policy, but clear guidelines. And then they educated their entire company. If you don't understand it, call 1-800 help desk for AI, and we'll help you figure it out. And I mean, that's a great thing, right?
And that's one of the things that, I've seen a lot of organizations at the very beginning of the year, because ChatGPT is what became it kind of consumerized at that point in time, right? The world was excited. They wanted to jump in and try to figure out different ways that they could kind of start learning this thing. And then, as you point out, you have to kind of put the guardrails in it to say, hey, hold on, right? Especially for an organization that's, potentially having access to consumer information, customer data, like be careful what you're using this stuff
PHI,
for, right?
Financial information.
Exactly. Sensitive data.
Yeah. And by the way, it may not be regulated sensitive data, but it might be the IP of your organization that you lose patents on if that goes to market, right? Like there's real reasons, Rob, that we have to be thinking, how do we help them apply the brakes as a business and let the people think about it? And by the way, let them be accountable. Right. And in some way, it's helped them be accountable for themselves. And so I think that focus in getting that stood up, that education, that capability, and those processes to fast-paced people through the process when they need help is one way that CISOs can really help. And we're good at that. We're good at finding a problem area, getting them onto an on-ramp or an off-ramp that's necessary, and creating the education and excitement around it. I think a lot of great CISOs I know do that super well.
Yeah.
And the other thing we do is protect infrastructure. And really, AI pipelines, guys, it's just infrastructure and software. It's CI/CD on crack for AI, and it's the infrastructure that goes along with it, right? I mean, think about it. It's infrastructure, data, network, transmission, data storage, access, AAA in general. The 20% is the weird stuff like insertion defense, model defense, right? That's the 20%. And by the way, there's what, 5 companies out there, 4 companies that are kind of doing that in the market today in any real way. And so people are getting wound up around the what do I do for the 20%? Do you know where all your AI is? Do you know the infrastructure it's sitting on? Is it micro-segmented from the rest of the environment? Do you know what data is in that data infrastructure? Have you done data analysis, data defense on it? Do you know what is connecting and going out of those data stores? All right. Do you know your API infrastructure that is connected to that? And do you have the right controls and monitoring capability in place? You've got enough work for the next year or two to protect, to define, segment, and protect your AI environments that will get you 80% of the way of protecting it. The rest of it, there are great partners out there. So priorities for AI, help your company be successful in embracing and understanding it. Second part of it's going to be go do our jobs on the infrastructure, data, and components that make up your AI environment.
Great points. Excellent. Kind of calling out to take something that, isn't the easiest topic and try to kind of simplify it in your approach, right? So let's get a little bit more, because we knew AI was going to start things off, but let's get a little bit more into your perspective on the other things that are emerging, the other things that people really need to be considering as well. What are some of those emerging trends and technologies that you would kind of say, hey, you should really be focusing and thinking about this as well?
Cloud security, my favorite, the gift that keeps on giving. I think in many contexts, I think I call it something a little bit differently. Now I call it like cloud and cloud platform environmental defense, right? Like I gotta call it a sexy name because cloud just seems to have gone away.
You sound like an analyst right now. You know that, right?
Oh, don't say that, man. Listen, there's probably 4 things. One of them is going to be repetitive. I'll let you guess what it is in a minute. But there's 4 things I think about in this space. One is if you haven't finished implementing your cloud controls, go finish them, right? Like automate them, automating the capabilities around those that we've put a bunch of controls in. There's a lot of great cloud defense platforms that have come to light, the Wiz's and the Aquas of the world, and, all the companies doing great things out there. But your companies have now integrated cloud as a component of how they build and develop their business at speed, right? Mm-hmm. Like, so I'm going to start a new service that's going to start up in 12 seconds, not 2 weeks, not 2 months, 12 seconds. I'm growing astronomically, and I have to keep the controls, the capabilities to protect, defend, monitor, and be able to respond to those environments. So to be able to integrate all of that stuff into my SOAR, into my SIM, into my business resiliency, like that has to happen with automation. So whether you do it yourself, bring in a partner, I don't care. Think about your heterogeneous cloud environments and how you're providing your services at scale and speed. And so in 24, clean up and automate, I think is huge. The second area that no one's talking about, and I'm shocked because I'm sure now that you called me an analyst, I think next year the analysts will pick up on this, but microservice mesh environments, right? So one thing I learned, massive growth area for me technical when I was at TikTok and ByteDance, was the amount of microservices in the world. Like I think TikTok's like 4,500 microservices or something crazy like that. Wow. Like to create the app. And so you think about your business and you go, yeah, I heard them call it microservices, but isn't that just a container? No, it's not. It's like an entire environment. And so what was such a learning opportunity for me was these mesh environments that make up the control plane infrastructure for microservices. It's like a new shadow IT. It's how the microservices talk. It's how they move data. It's how they control, connect between APIs. And they don't necessarily have to go outside that service mesh to actually do things like authentication, logging, and all of the other stuff. Right. So all of a sudden you have this massive amount of compute infrastructure and data movement in this mesh environment. And you're saying, yeah, the data goes here to here, and we're monitoring it, but it actually goes between the microservices and the mesh, and you never see it. How do you defend against that? Figure that out in your environment. Focus on microservices, not just containers. Compliance and assurance automation, guys, we just got to get and I'm sorry to all my best friends who are compliance people in our field, but we got to get rid of that. Like that CCM and CCA or continuing controls assurance and monitoring has to happen. And so a bunch of great startups in that area start thinking about how I go out, validate that my controls are in place and working and automated, that they're still doing the job and the efficacy is good. I collect the evidence and I put it in a place that someone can just populate a document with and go do my 12 compliance activities.
Right.
People shouldn't be doing that stuff anymore. And I think the last area in that space that is important to me is APIs. Like the API infrastructure, both in what we were talking about in AI and in this space, that should be insightful. People should be looking to see, what are my things connecting to? How are they authenticating? What services are they connecting internally and externally? What does my digital landscape look like through my API environment? How do I catalog them? When was the last time they were validated from a security vulnerability standpoint? Like, we forget about APIs because we think of it as code, but they're not. They're a thing. So in cloud, that's kind of my if you're going to focus on stuff in 24, finish your integration and automation, think about microservices, get out of the compliance game by automating the hell out of that, and then go figure out your APIs.
Those are the four. That makes sense. So let's talk about identities next, because everyone's talking about identities, whether it's, hey, we're revisiting and trying to kind of get a handle on, our program and different elements of it and how we're dealing with, the not non-human identities, right? IoT devices, these applications, APIs, microservices, they're all a form of identities, right? Coming in. What are you seeing in that area? What are your thoughts? And do you have a top 4, top 2, top 3, top 5? What do you got?
I'm just freaking floored that I'm not 29 anymore. And
you look at
it's thanks, babe. And it's a couple of years later from when I started, and the first big project I did was around identity, and we're still talking about it because it's so and I get it. It's massive to scale, but you're right. It's, first of all, this might be a newsflash, but if you haven't done centralized AAA and identity assurance, maybe you should centralize, right?
Yeah.
But you got to go beyond that. So step 1, centralize it. You actually manage it, control it, and validate it, and you know what's going on. I think the second one came to me this year, and not through my personal experience, although I've had to do some stuff in the social side around inauthentic identity and individual validation and verification. But this whole new world around identity verification to access validation, like
the proofing of it, basically.
Yeah, the whole issue that happened out with our favorite folks in Las Vegas, last month, and a couple of those really well-designed hacks gets back to identity validation. So some of the work we do online for verification and validation, we never really talk about what does that mean for our enterprise or platform access management. So my suggestion to my peers for 24 is, don't have to solve for it. Go do your threat mapping, right? Like, figure out what identity verification means to you for your administrative access, to your general employees, to your executives, to what does that mean? Money movement versus approvals versus cloud access. Like, what does that mean? And how do you do that in a meaningful way where you have the most risk? So I think this year, risk assessment around that, super, super important. The other focus, and I'm a big transparency guy, let's go out and find it, because if I can't see it, I can't protect it, right? Like, I have to understand it to be able to do it. So what's the beyond the human, beyond the carbon-based life forms, right? Like, machine-to-machine access, application authentication, token verification and validation. Who moves them? Who has access? How long does token verification work across how many platforms can use it? Right? If you have one token management, that is for a specific entire, let's say it's a go-to-market application you're using, and it's used across the entire chain, is that good? Probably not. Is it good for 48 or 92 hours or 3 weeks? Probably not good. Right? You're going to have to start doing threat-based analytics on this beyond human identity authentication and authorization capability. And it starts with cataloging it and understanding it, and making sure you have a good handle on it.
Roland, let's explore the area of data. Organizations are constantly looking for innovative ways they can utilize data as a means of driving insights and identifying new market opportunities where they can monetize data that they've ingested. Yet we still come across organizations that lack a true understanding of where their sensitive data is, whether it be structured or unstructured data sets. What do you think the priority should be in that context of, again, knowing your data and as it applies to different use cases in the organization, whether it be for analytics, privacy requirements, or any other initiatives? How then do they ensure that that data, that sensitive data again, is protected appropriately?
This was a life lesson over the last 3 or 4 years. I've been in critical infrastructure defense and big data type organizations since EMC, ADP for a decade. Like they really, really sensitive data. Where your information is, how you're protecting consumer data, table stakes, right? Silly discussion. But when you really start getting into the details of compliance and assurance and validation across jurisdictional lines and the implication of privacy enforcement requirements and be able to operate in different jurisdictions, right? Like this becomes super important. And I used to get a lot of pushback when I talked about this because people would say, well, you're a multinational, you're rolling your CSO of big companies, you're in multi countries, that's super important. We're a republic of 50 states and they are all their own governments. If you have, children's data, like under the age of 16 in Illinois, it's very different than having it in Florida, right? Like in the states treat it very differently. And so your accountability for managing and assuring the level of protection of the data within your care, custody, and control is super important. So data defense is now, I ask a lot of my peers, like, so what are you doing in data defense area? Well, we're going to implement X to go find it. That's great. I mean, from my perspective, as long as you're doing the basic 4 things, where is it? What is it contextually? Not just, is it a social security number or a driver's license or a federal ID card? Who has access to it? And where did it come from? And where did it go? So then you can apply all the things that you were talking about, am I supposed to use that data in certain contexts or not? Right? Like if you can answer those 4 things, you're probably at the top, 10% of 5% of companies that can do that. But that is super hard. So organizations have to be able to find their information, apply controls, and do it in a reasonable time. We can't take 4 weeks to scan our data stores and come back and say, I know where my PCI stuff is, and I know where my health care stuff is.
Roland, I think I'm going to do the 5 takeaways, right? These are the 5 areas that we've discussed that you were saying, hey, listen, if I'm looking into next year, and also building the plan over multiple years, of course, right? AI, we start off because that's the hot topic. Everybody understands, right? But it's getting, kind of a better perspective of, as you said, if you can do certain things, you can get good head start. You can probably cover about 80%, kind of putting the right policy guardrails in place, helping you get augmented on that side of it going forward. Then you talked about, hey, listen, cloud. We've been talking about cloud for the past, 4 or 5 years now, and it's continuing the conversation, right? I kind of go back to the whole, we're still trying to figure out really what is the shared responsibility model. And it's like, come on, really? We're still dealing with that? But people are, right? The third you talked about is around APIs, but also the microservices mesh, as you described it, right? Again, a key area, I think, as you explained, your most previous role was an eye opener, if you will, right? With over 4,500 microservices, for one given application. Granted, a massive application, but still, people aren't really wrapping their heads around that currently, and they need to start thinking about that, as you stated. The identity piece, yes, back from your early days of last year when you were 29, it's still a conversation today, right? And everyone's trying to figure out, again, what's next? What are we doing? Identity proofing, identity governance, as we discussed, a lot of great topics in that front. And then the data, because ultimately, if you think about it, from the attacker perspective, what are they trying to ultimately get to? The data. So how do we actually have better understanding of what actually we have for sensitive, important data, whether it is something that's driven by privacy regulation, whether it is something that's our intellectual property, customer information, API, you name it. We need to better understand what type of data is important for our business, our particular functions in our business, get visibility into it, have ongoing basis of being able to understand where it resides. And as you said, build that foundation to then up level and say, okay, now we want to take certain actions, how we protect it, and so on and so forth. So those are the 5 kind of over-the-top areas that you really called out as people should be paying attention to right now as they're planning for next year. Did I miss anything on that front?
Can I get an amen?
Amen, brother.
It's perfect. At the end of the day, a third of our job is going to be around how we protect data. It's infrastructure, it's everything, but the requirements and the privacy enforcement, all that's falling to us. That's going to be around the data. You'll be great if you can go focus on that, and you'll be able to engage and deliver things like AI if you can control your data. And then the only last thing I would say, guys, is look at your people. These are all new skills. These are all new areas. Make sure you're making the appropriate adjustments to your job families. You're migrating their skills through training, and then you're looking at where you're getting your people from in the future.
Excellent conversation, Roland. Definitely.
Thanks for the time, guys. It was awesome.
And that was Roland Cloutier, again, the former CSO of TikTok. Just great, tremendous knowledge of wealth, his experience over time. So I hope you enjoy that. And we're looking forward to another episode next week that should actually, again, treat the audience to some great new perspective in cybersecurity and approaches people are taking. Till next time.